All right, good morning, everybody. I'm going to get started here. As you can see, I've been putting up quite a bit on the board just in terms of the dates and periods and things that we've been going over. We're going to put a list together. It'll be online as well. But just so you guys can follow the different periods and the different type sites that we're going to be talking about today. Any questions before we get started? We covered a lot of material on the pre-pottery Neolithic last time. We saw that transition from moving from hunter-gatherer societies into more settled, stable, sedentary societies, the emergence of agriculture, domestication of animals, that sort of stuff. Any questions about any of that material before we get started? In these early classes, we're going to be covering just huge swaths of time. As we get a little bit farther in the semester, things are going to slow down. Today is going to be no exception. Today, we're actually going to be picking up where we left off last time with the pottery Neolithic, which begins around 7,000 BC and goes to about 4,000 BC. We're going to be looking at four distinct cultures within that period in Mesopotamia: Hassuna culture, Samarran culture, Halaf culture, and Ubaid culture. Also, you'll see the Halaf period or the Ubaid period, those names used interchangeably. Do you mind if let's kill the lights. All right, so as we get started, we talked about the pre-pottery Neolithic last time. And just to recap some of those main points, again, we saw the shift to sustained agriculture and animal husbandry, more permanent settlements, and this transition period, including monumental architecture at places like Jericho, right? Even huge stone walls, 10,000 tons of stone being moved into permanent settlements, permanent public buildings for defense, possibly also for ritual use. Evidence of long-distance trade between communities, and an increased artistic repertoire using new mediums, including textiles. That and also ritual activity, including new forms of burial practice, and of course, everything leading up to what causes the break between the pre-pottery Neolithic and the pottery Neolithic, which is, of course, pottery. So these advances in pyrotechnology, which we talked about last time. Just to recap, we're looking at this great site to look at the transition. This is, of course, the site of Çatalhöyük again. And we looked at some of the ritual activity taking place at this site, the plastering of walls using lime plaster, right, which requires quite a bit of control over industrial processes, huge amounts of plaster, and then painting, right, artistic representation. Now we can devote time to the arts, time to depicting all sorts of things. And at Çatalhöyük, we see a lot of this, right? This 2-meter long red bull with these hunters surrounding it, and the fact that these rooms, these central rooms, which I wanted to point out, I didn't point out last time. You can see this is from Rofe again. In all of these housing units, which are fairly uniform, you'll see a little S here. These are specific rooms that were identified by Mellart as shrines. There are quite a few of them to be shrines. We think they had more of a domestic ritual purpose, but here's a reconstruction of one we looked at last time. If you remember, we see these really interesting, enigmatic feline figures, these plastered figures, which are above bull horns and bull skulls plastered into the walls. Mellart thought this was some sort of bull cult. The divine feminine and the divine masculine being bulls, feminine being this sort of feline leopard iconography. That also, of course, going with these very voluptuous figurines which we see. I wanted to point out, we didn't point this out last time, that this figurine from Çatalhöyük, again around 7,000 BC, you can see she's actually seated on a throne. Either that, or she is actually being flanked by two animals, right? She's probably, a stylized person, maybe an ancestor, maybe a divinity, but she is sitting flanked by these two felines. You can see right here, there on both sides. Keep this in mind. This is something we'll see later on. The idea of flanking animals, a symmetrical positioning of especially felines. And at Çatalhöyük, right, we also have a lot of feline imagery, including these plastered leopards, which are a wonderful combination of techniques, right? They're painted, but at the same time, right, they're actually coming out. They're physically molded. So at Quetzalcoatl, what we see is not just an explosion of painting and the plastic arts, but also the birth of a real iconographic system, a system where images and symbols are actually combined across space and time and deployed in different contexts for different effects. So really, this is a system of communication, a real artistic explosion of a complex and fragmentary civilization that we can only just start to get at. At the same time, to the south, right? So Quetzalcoatl's up here in Anatolia. To the south, in Cyprus, we see similar developments taking place. Around 6000 BCE, at the village of Kirkatia Vuni, we see similar developments. In this case, we're back to roundhouses, but again, roundhouses made out of stone, massive in size, requiring cooperation, perhaps again, the use of public space, right? You can see this very large central structure, which might have been used publicly, or perhaps was used by somebody of higher social standing, who knows? But similar practices taking place in Cyprus at this time. Intramural burials with burial goods. This is actually, if you go to the site, this is a photocopy that they sort of like pasted into the site itself to show you what was there. And systems of art that are quite complex for their time. You can see this figurine, I don't have a good scale on it, but it's actually quite small. This is a Picrolite Neolithic figurine from Cyprus, and it's only about this big. It's about maybe 2 inches tall, and it has a small piercing in the back where it would have been worn by an individual. And you can see that actually this is one of our first examples of self-referential art. You, as an owner of this figurine, would wear it, and you can see that the figurine itself is sort of talking about what it should be used for, right? The figurine itself is actually wearing itself. So it's this wonderful kind of almost postmodern reflexivity in art. It is what it symbolizes, and so it's a very interesting early piece. Yeah?
What did the cross mean to them? It was like 7,000 BC.
Yeah, this does look like a cross, right? It very much looks like a cross. And of course, the cross predates Christianity as far as being a very powerful symbol. These symbols get changed and used over time. We're going to see swastikas later on, right? That were then appropriated in the 1920s. We think of swastikas today, the 30s and 40s, as being symbols of the Nazis, right? But these are all symbols that predate their best known use. And in this case, he is kind of a cruciform figurine, and just a stylized human being, right? I mean, we ourselves have 2 arms. We have, a head, and we tend to kind of come in this shape. So that's just a long way of saying I'm not sure. But certainly not the same sort of, connotations that it would later have with Christianity. So we know what's taking place in Anatolia. We know what's taking place in Cyprus. But what about in Mesopotamia? We'll go back to our Fertile Crescent. We know that the earliest period of settlement begins in northern Mesopotamia, around 7,000 to 6,500 BCE. Settlements become widespread across this rain-fed agricultural zone. But still, we don't see any settlement taking place in central Mesopotamia, that being because all of the farming that's taking place is dry farming. It's reliant on these weather patterns in the Zagros and Taurus mountains, and you're dependent completely on that for your agriculture. We're going to see that shift. Around 6,500, we see the emergence of what's known as Hassuna culture. And Hassuna culture is named, again, just for the site of Hassuna, where some of this pottery was first found relating to Hassuna culture. And very simple pottery emerges there. It's very coarse with lots of chaff in it. But we see a number of new developments there, new for Mesopotamia. Relief decoration, painting. We see new styles of pottery emerging, especially later with the full emergence. This very interesting, these different types of pottery and different techniques being used to create it. You can see here there's a small vessel Hassuna vessel, which is very, very rough on the outside, but the design has actually been etched in before firing. So it's this incised design. That's contrasted with this very fine painted ware, which has these stylized faces on it. And it's quite the opposite. It's very smooth and burnished. Burnishing is another technique. Instead of etching and creating designs before firing, burnishing, you can take a pot that is what's called leather hard. You make the pot, you let it dry naturally, and then you come at it with a stone or a shell, and you just rub and rub and rub and rub and rub, and it gets very, very, very smooth. Then you fire it, and later on we'll see actually these vessels can have the appearance of almost being so shiny that they look like they're made out of metal. So these new styles of pottery are emerging with Hassuna culture, and at the site we see, again, the emergence of what appears to be communal architecture. We've got settlements that are small. These are very small buildings, which are about 1.5 meters on the long side. And they're arranged around 3 sides of open space. Again, like Çatalhöyük, probably entered from the roof. The remains are quite fragmentary, but we see these large storage facilities. You can see these granaries here for the storage of food, which again allows us to weather the long months and increases security for subsistence. We see during this period in this site also the introduction of a number of new and important classes of artifact. With this new form of pottery, we see the introduction of what's called the dome kiln. The dome kiln allows you to get higher temperatures and also fire pottery in larger batches. Before, you can see this is sort of a firing of pottery in which you would lay all of your sticks and fuel out around the outside and then fire it this way. The dome kiln is very different. It's a structure, it's built in, and you actually fire from the bottom, which allows for a more even distribution of heat. So your pottery is better fired, it's better quality. And unlike these, sort of temporary structures, a dome kiln is permanent. So it goes hand in hand again with this shift towards a sedentary lifestyle, being in one place. We see a few more things during this period too. Sling bullets. You can see these examples here. They're made out of clay, not fired clay in this case, but more leather hard clay. This is actually one that hit its target pretty hard. You can see they would start like this and then end up splat like this. In later periods, we'll see sling bullets. They're incredibly effective. They shift over to small metals. These are like the slings, that David and Goliath in that story, that David would have used, that kind of stuff. But really just a strip of material in which you would spin and then release. You can get so much speed with these things. You can check it out on YouTube, actually, people using slings. You can blow up a watermelon with one of these things. It's an incredibly, incredibly powerful tool. That said, the need for sling bullets, the need for defense, the need for weaponry, to defend what's yours, to defend personal property. We're seeing the need for warfare, and that's a development that's taking place during this period, increasing social stratification and the need for defense. Spindle whorls show up. We talked about the domestication of goats and sheep giving you wool. Spindle whorls are these small pieces here. They're often made out of bone or stone.